Welcome to another deep dive.
Oh, yeah.
This time.
This is a good one.
We're going deep on the Meredith Kercher case.
Absolutely.
Um,
It's a wild story.
it is a wild story.
We've got a ton of sources for this one.
Yeah, we do.
Articles, court documents.
Oh, yeah.
Even parts of Amanda Knox's book.
Oh, wow.
So,
Get ready.
buckle up.
This is one where the truth is,
You want to hang on tight for this one.
it's really hard to find.
Yeah.
It's buried under all these layers.
It really is. And it's a story that shows how
Yeah.
perception can become reality.
Yeah.
And we're going to look at
The
that,
unpack?
how forensic science can be a really powerful tool,
Mm-hmm.
but can also be very misleading.
Yes.
Especially when the media gets a hold of it.
For sure.
And they
amplify every...
They amplify all the uncertainties.
Absolutely.
So
let's set the scene.
okay, let's do it.
2007.
2007.
Perugia, Italy.
Beautiful Perugia.
Yeah.
University town.
This British exchange student, Meredith Kercher,
Yep.
she's found murdered.
In the apartment she shares.
Yeah, in her apartment.
With other students, including
With roommates.
Amanda Knox.
Right, and the crime scene is
Brutal.
brutal.
It's brutal.
And the media just pounces on this story.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they
jump right on it.
jump right on it.
So-
What I find interesting
yeah.
is how quickly the focus
Yeah.
shifted from a robbery
Right.
to something much more sensational,
Right.
centered on Knox and her boyfriend at the time, Raffaele Sollecito.
Yeah, it's almost like they went right past robbery and went right to this.
Like that was the more interesting story for them.
Yeah.
And I think that says a lot
Mhm.
about the case.
Well, and so Knox's behavior in those early days, I mean, became such a focus.
Like she was under a microscope.
Right, and there she was, like
Mhm.
kissing Sollecito outside the apartment.
While the police are investigating.
Oh,
it.
while they're investigating.
Like right there.
Right there. And this was before
Right.
everyone had their phone out recording everything.
Yes.
This is back when public opinion
Right.
was shaped by what?
By traditional media.
By traditional media.
The tabloids especially.
Especially the tabloids.
They just chose what they wanted to highlight.
Yeah, they got to decide what people saw.
And that's what people believed.
That's what people saw.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what they chose to highlight.
What they deemed inappropriate behavior.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The tabloids
Yeah.
really latched on to this nickname they gave her, Foxy Knoxy.
Oh, yeah.
And that kind of took on a life of its own.
And that really influenced, I think, how the public saw her.
Yeah, they focused on her personality
Yeah.
and her actions
Mm-hmm.
and almost forgot about the victim.
Right. They turned her into the story.
They turned her into the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good point.
It's a tough point to ignore.
How quickly the focus shifted
From victim
to the accused.
to the accused.
Yeah.
I mean, in Italy, it was interesting. They were calling her like an angel face and a she-devil,
Right. It's all over the place.
depending on which media outlet you were looking at.
Right.
But
It's a wild swing.
a powerful example of how
Mm.
media narratives can really shape the story.
Mhm.
The constant images and opinions that were
Yeah.
circulating out there,
Mm.
it shaped public opinion long before any verdict was reached.
Yeah, before any verdict was reached.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to kind of bring it back
Okay.
and to the facts of what happened here.
Yeah. So
Let's go back.
we know the break-in
Okay.
appeared staged.
It appeared staged
The window was broken
from the inside.
from the inside.
Yes. So who?
Right. So who was involved?
Yeah, that's the question.
So the prosecution,
Yeah.
they really focused their theory
Mm-hmm.
on this sex gang gone wrong.
That's right.
They implicated Knox,
Mm-hmm.
Sollecito,
And this third person,
Right.
Rudy Guede.
right, and Guede. His DNA was all over the crime scene.
Oh, yeah, his DNA
It
was
was undeniable.
undeniable.
They even used it to convict him later.
Yeah,
So,
but their theory really leaned on
yeah, they leaned
extremist
heavily
injuries.
on Kercher's injuries as evidence of multiple attackers.
So they're saying that all three of them were involved, but if Guede was already there,
Okay.
as his DNA proves,
As his DNA proves,
why involve the other two?
that's a really good question.
Like, what evidence did they have?
Yeah, what evidence did they have to link them to the crime?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
that's where it gets interesting.
That's where the forensic evidence gets a little...
Yeah.
Oh.
Let's talk about the forensic evidence.
Okay, so the prosecution had this knife
Okay.
that they said they found at Sollecito's apartment.
Okay. At his apartment.
They said it had Kercher's DNA on the blade
Okay.
and Knox DNA on the handle.
So
Sounds
there-
pretty damning, right?
that sounds like a smoking gun.
It does,
Yeah.
but it faced a lot of scrutiny later on.
So let's break that down.
Okay.
So Kercher's DNA on the blade.
Yes.
Knocks on the handle.
That's what they said.
But what came out later?
Well, the amount of DNA they actually recovered was so tiny, it was barely enough to even be considered reliable.
Oh, wow.
Think of it like this.
Yeah.
Like trying to identify somebody from like a single strand of hair.
Okay.
The chances of error are much higher.
Yeah, way higher.
Than if you have a big sample.
Right, like...
To work with.
Yeah, you need more to work with. So it's like... A tiny little sample.
Trying to make a giant pot of soup.
Yes.
With one single grain of rice.
Exactly.
You get a little hint of the flavor.
You might get a little hint.
But you're not getting the full picture. Yeah, and so...
And then on top of that...
There were issues.
Yeah. There were concerns about contamination.
During the collection of the evidence.
Right.
So with such a small amount.
Yeah.
Even a tiny trace.
Yeah.
Of something else.
Could completely skew the result.
Could just completely change everything.
Oh, wow.
So already.
So already.
The smoking gun is starting to fall apart.
Crumble under scrutiny.
Yeah, and then there was that bra clasp.
Oh, yeah, the bra clasp.
They found weeks later.
Oh, yeah, weeks later.
And they said it had Sollecito's DNA on it.
But it was found weeks later.
Weeks later.
That seems really strange.
It does seem strange.
Yeah.
Like, why?
To find such a key piece of evidence so long after the fact?
Yeah, like, that's a major red flag when it comes to forensic evidence.
Huge red flag.
And not only was it found weeks later, it wasn't stored properly.
Okay.
So that brings up a ton of questions.
Yeah, about the chain of custody.
Exactly.
Right.
For those who don't know.
Chain of custody basically means
it's like
they're keeping track of...
Keeping a detailed record
of who's handling it.
Who's touching it.
And when...
Sure.
So if that chain is broken at any point...
Yeah, if it's broken.
You just can't be sure it hasn't been tampered with.
You can't be sure that that evidence is actually reliable.
And that undermines the whole investigation.
Yeah, it does.
It's like playing a game of telephone.
Exactly.
Right? If the message gets distorted.
If the message gets changed along the way, you can't trust the end result.
You don't know.
And so the way they mishandled that bra clasp,
right,
it just makes you question all the forensic evidence.
Yeah, it just casts doubt on all of it.
On everything.
So we've got this shaky DNA evidence. A bra clasp found weeks later. Mishandled media frenzy. Already painting Knox as the villain.
That's right.
But what about Rudy Guede?
Yeah.
Right? Like, we know his DNA was all over the crime scene.
It was everywhere.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, there's no denying Rudy Guede was there.
Yeah.
His DNA was on her body.
Yeah. Her belongings. Yeah. All over the place. All over. He later admitted to being in the apartment. Oh. But he claimed she didn't kill her. Okay. And that she was alive when he left.
Interesting. So we have one person definitely linked.
Okay.
And two others.
With much weaker connections.
With these tenuous connections.
Yeah.
And yet, Knox and Sollecito became...
the center of the story.
The focus of this whole thing.
The focus of the investigation.
Seems like there's a piece missing.
It does feel like something's missing.
Yeah.
And I think that missing piece is understanding how the prosecution... crafted their narrative and how they connected those dots.
Yeah.
Because they seem...
It's so disparate.
They seem so separate.
Yes.
So to really understand this case, we have to look at both sides.
Okay.
The prosecution, the defense.
Okay.
And really critically evaluate what they're saying.
Yeah, evaluate their arguments.
Yeah. Okay, so that's what we're going to do next.
That's what we're going to do.
We're going to go...
We're going to dive
deeper into those narratives.
The trials.
Yeah, the trials and all the years of legal battles.
Because they went on for years.
That followed.
And we're going to keep in mind that the media was just humming along this whole time.
That constant noise.
Influencing public opinion every step of the way.
Yeah.
What's really interesting about this case is it shows how human the justice system is.
Yeah.
Because we're not just talking about facts.
Right.
We're talking about
perceptions. Biases. And the consequences.
And how those things can really impact people's lives.
So stay with us.
Yes, stay tuned.
As we continue to deep dive
into the Meredith Kercher case.
We'll examine the evidence.
We'll look at the trials.
Yeah.
And the questions.
All the questions that still surround this case.
Yeah. This story is...
It's tragic.
Tragic.
And captivating.
And so captivating.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dig into the prosecution's case a little bit.
Okay.
They really tried to make Amanda Knox out to be this manipulator. Someone with a dark side.
Right.
Someone capable of doing something really awful.
Capable of the violence that was inflicted on Meredith.
Yeah, and they pointed to her behavior.
Right after the murder.
Right after the murder, the kissing.
The kissing outside the apartment.
As proof of this, like, cold and callous personality.
It's almost like they were trying to fit her into this foxy-noxy box.
Exactly.
That the media had already created.
Yeah, and they argued that maybe she was jealous.
Right.
Maybe she wanted some kind of thrill. And that she orchestrated the attack.
Okay.
They even used her initial statement.
Okay.
Remember, where she implicated her boss, Patrick Lumumba?
Yeah.
Even though she later retracted it.
Right.
They used that as evidence that she was trying to mislead the police.
Right. And that just played right into what the media was already saying.
Absolutely.
It just ate it up.
Headlines everywhere.
Yeah.
Drug-fueled sex game gone wrong.
Right. And she was the mastermind.
She was the mastermind.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to ignore how much that frenzy would have influenced public opinion.
Right. It must have had some impact on the jury.
Oh, I'm sure it did. I mean, jurors are human.
Of course.
They're not immune to all that noise.
To all that information and all those opinions floating around.
Exactly.
But what happens if we just take all that away?
Okay.
And we just look at the evidence.
If we just look at the facts.
Objectively.
The prosecution's case really starts to fall apart.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, as we've already discussed.
Yeah.
The forensic evidence was shaky at best.
Right. That tiny amount of DNA.
A minuscule amount.
Oh, and the knife.
And the potential for contamination.
Right. And then the bra clasp.
Found weeks later and improperly stored.
Yeah.
It just
casts doubt on all of it.
It just casts doubt on the whole thing.
It almost seems like they were so focused on their narrative that they just tried to make the evidence fit.
They tried to force it to fit.
Instead of letting the evidence lead them.
Instead of letting the evidence lead them to the truth.
Yeah.
That's a real danger in any high-profile case.
It is, isn't it?
The pressure to get a conviction, especially when the public is, like, baying for blood.
Yeah, they want someone to pay.
They want justice.
Yeah.
So sometimes that can overshadow the truth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's look at the other side.
Okay.
What was the defense's argument?
Their argument was a lot simpler.
Okay.
They said Rudy Guede acted alone.
Okay.
They highlighted his DNA.
Which was all over.
It was everywhere.
The crime scene.
On her body.
Yeah, her belongings.
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
They said he had a history of petty theft break-ins.
Okay. So they're saying he was capable of this.
He was capable of this kind of violence.
So basically they're saying he surprised her.
That he maybe surprised her at the apartment. Panicked and attacked her.
And that Knox and Sollecito
were not even there.
Weren't even there.
When it happened.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and they emphasized that Knox and Sollecito
had
no motive.
No motive.
To hurt Meredith.
Okay.
They presented them as a young couple. Just caught in the middle.
Wrong place, wrong time.
Wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Caught in this terrible tragedy.
It does seem simpler.
It does seem simpler.
More straightforward explanation.
And it seems to fit better.
Yeah.
With the DNA evidence.
With that DNA evidence.
But there are still some things it doesn't address.
Like what?
Well, like why did the break-in look staged?
Right.
And why did Knox's statements to the police change?
Right.
Those are valid points.
It wasn't a perfect kid.
It wasn't a perfect case.
Yeah.
But the defense argued that maybe Guede staged the break-in.
Okay.
To mislead investigators.
To throw them off.
Throw them off.
All right.
And they said that Knox's inconsistent statements were due to stress.
Yeah, the confusion.
The confusion, the language barrier.
She wasn't fluent in Italian.
No, she wasn't.
Right, and it was a prolonged interrogation.
Yeah, hours and hours.
So you can imagine.
It's easy to imagine her.
Getting flustered.
Yeah, getting flustered and saying things.
Yeah.
That weren't totally accurate.
Especially under that kind of pressure.
Yeah, and it's important to remember, she was never actually charged with lying to the police.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So we have these two really different stories.
Two very different stories.
Two very different theories.
The prosecution's theory.
Yeah, this complicated story about a sex game gone wrong.
Right, and fueled by Knox's dark side.
And then the defense saying Guede acted alone.
And that they were just innocent bystanders.
And they just got caught up in this whole mess.
Yeah.
Both sides had their strengths and weaknesses.
For sure.
I mean, the prosecution story was captivating.
It was, but the evidence was pretty weak.
Yeah, and then the defense?
They had a more believable explanation.
Right.
It fit the DNA.
Yeah.
But they couldn't really explain everything.
Right. There were still those holes.
Yeah, and that's where the Italian legal system really comes into play.
Right, because this case went through years of trials and appeals.
Convictions, acquittals, retrials.
Oh, my gosh.
It just got more and more complicated.
Yeah. Seems like it just kept going and going.
It really did, and it exposed some issues with the Italian justice system.
Like what kind of issues?
Well, like how they handle evidence.
Okay.
And how much the media can sway public opinion.
Right.
It also shows how different legal systems can be.
Oh, yeah, like in America.
You're innocent until proven guilty.
Right. But it seems like...
In Italy, it's almost like you have to prove your innocence.
Right. That's a huge difference.
It is, and I think that difference really affected how this case was seen.
Both in Italy and internationally.
All over the world.
And then there's Rudy Guede's trial.
Right.
Which happened separately.
Separately, but it's still connected.
Right.
I mean, his DNA was everywhere.
So he was convicted.
He was convicted.
But how did that affect Knox and Sollecito's trials?
Well, the prosecution said that their trials weren't about whether Guede was guilty.
Right, because they already knew.
They already knew he was guilty. They said it was about figuring out if Knox and Sollecito were involved too.
So even though he was already serving time?
He was already in prison.
They were still trying.
They're still trying to pin it on him.
Oh.
Yeah. It was a tough argument for the defense to fight.
It sounds like it.
They couldn't ignore Guede.
Right.
They didn't want to say he wasn't involved.
Right, but they had to convince the jury.
That just because he was there
Yeah.
didn't mean they were too...
That's a hard line to walk.
It's like walking a tightrope.
Yeah.
So let's get into the trials themselves.
Okay.
How did each one go?
What were the turning points?
And how did the media keep pushing their narrative?
Right.
In Italy and around the world?
That's what we're going to talk about next.
Yeah, let's step into the courtroom.
It's time for the legal battles.
And see what happens.
This is where it gets really wild. Okay, so we've got these competing narratives. We've looked at the evidence.
Or lack thereof.
Yeah, and the media frenzy.
Yeah, the media just wouldn't let go.
No, they didn't.
So
let's go to court.
All right, let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens in the trials.
The first trial ended in 2009.
Okay.
And they found them both guilty.
Guilty.
Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito.
Wow.
Knox got 26 years.
26 years.
Sollecito got 25.
That's a long time.
That's a long time.
Especially when you're saying you're innocent.
Exactly.
So what was the reaction?
Oh, it was a huge mix of emotions.
I bet.
I mean, the public was really divided.
I can imagine.
Especially after everything the media had been saying.
Right.
Some people thought justice was served. Others thought it was a total miscarriage of justice.
Based on the evidence.
Based on the evidence.
Yeah.
And how the case had been handled.
Right. So facing those sentences.
Yeah.
Did Knox and Sollecito just give up?
Not at all.
Okay.
They appealed right away.
Okay.
And then in 2011, the appeals court overturned the convictions.
What?
Yeah. They said there wasn't enough evidence.
Wow.
And they had serious doubts about the forensic evidence.
That's a huge turn of events to be exonerated.
To be exonerated.
After 4 years in prison.
Yeah, 4 years of their lives.
That's a long time.
It's a long time.
And even if you're proven innocent.
Right.
There's still that psychological toll.
Absolutely.
Right, like how do you even...
How do you come back from that?
Yeah.
It's a huge chunk of their lives.
Stolen.
Stolen.
Yeah.
By a system that messed up.
So were they finally free after that?
That's where it gets crazy again.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So Italy's highest court, the Supreme Court of Cassation, they overturned the acquittal.
What?
Yeah.
How is that even possible?
In 2013, they ordered a retrial.
So even after being acquitted?
Even after being acquitted.
They had to go through another trial.
They did.
It just seems like they couldn't escape this.
The system just wouldn't let them go.
Yeah.
The Italian legal system is set up differently than ours.
Okay.
They can appeal and retry cases multiple times.
Oh, wow.
And in this case, the Supreme Court said the appeals court didn't look at all the evidence closely enough.
So they said go back and do it again?
Basically.
Yeah. It's just unbelievable.
It's hard to imagine what they were going through.
Yeah, that emotional roller coaster.
To be free.
And then pulled back in.
And then to face going back to prison.
That's just
awful.
It's just an awful situation.
So the retrial happened in 2014.
Okay.
And they were convicted again.
Again.
But the sentences were shorter.
Okay, shorter, but still.
Still convicted.
It just seems like there was never any closure.
Right. Like, would this ever end?
It just kept going and going.
But then finally, in 2015, the highest court exonerated them.
They did.
They said there was not enough evidence.
Wow.
And they actually criticized
Oh, wow.
how the investigation was handled.
In the media.
And how much the media influenced everything.
So after almost a decade.
Almost a decade.
They were finally free.
They were free.
But their lives were changed forever.
Right, their lives were completely upended.
Yeah, Knox especially.
Yeah.
She became the face.
The face of wrongful conviction.
And media sensationalism.
And it shows that even when justice prevails, there are no real winners.
No, everyone loses.
Everyone carries the weight of this tragedy.
Yeah.
And the scars.
They linger.
They last a long time.
In the Meredith Kercher case.
Yeah.
It's still talked about today.
People still debate it.
Yeah, some people still think.
They think Knox and Sollecito were guilty.
And others say they were victims.
Of a system that failed.
Of the media.
Of the media.
It really makes you think.
It does make you think.
About the justice system.
About how reliable evidence is.
About how powerful stories can be.
And how those stories can shape our views of guilt and innocence.
Yeah. And this case really shows us that we need to be critical thinkers.
Yes. Question everything.
Don't just accept what you hear.
Especially from the media.
Right. Think for yourself.
And recognize the power.
Yeah, the media's power.
To influence our perceptions.
Yeah. This case is a reminder that even with all our technology, justice is still very human.
It's still messy.
It can be flawed.
It can be biased.
Yeah.
It's not perfect.
And it's influenced by things.
By outside pressures.
So if you want to learn more about this case...
There are a ton of resources out there.
Books, articles, documentaries.
You can find all sorts of perspectives.
Yeah.
Do your own research.
Form your own conclusions.
Because the truth is hard to find.
It is.
And it's up to each of us.
Yeah.
To figure out what we believe.
So thank you for joining us.
For this deep dive
into this case.
One of the most captivating, controversial cases ever.
We hope this made you think.
And we hope you'll keep questioning.
The information you see.
And the stories you hear.
Because the stories.
They really shape our understanding.
Of the world.
So keep thinking critically.
Thanks for listening.